So the next question I want to talk a little bit about like the interview process itself. So the question I want to ask is, what was the interview process for you like? What types of questions did people ask you? What type of questions did you ask them? And like just in general, how did they go about evaluating your coding skills? And do you think they did a good job? Do you think they did a bad job? And just like talk about the interview experience just a little bit.
I think mine was a lot lighter in part because of timing, because of the Boston blizzard. I couldn't physically go into the office. So I think I almost got out of the coding challenge part of it. At first, we had a phone screener. So I talked with a senior developer about basic knowledge. And that was pretty common in every job that I applied to and had an interview for. Just check your basic knowledge, simple stuff to see if you're a good fit for the position. You know, general Ruby, Rails, MVC, routing, Git, TDD type questions. Like, you know, why would you test before you write your code? And prove that you have a conceptualization about why you would do that. You know what TDD is. You can explain what it is. You should know what objects are and that Ruby is object oriented and what that means. And you know, they're also probably looking to see if you can expand on that, not just say, well, this is an object and this is why. Okay, next question. They want you to expand on that and show that you're interested in it, you've done your research, and that you can talk about it. After that, there was an hour-long technical phone call on Skype that was supposed to be in office, but there was the Boston blizzard. That was more technical questions. That was more in-depth than that. There were a lot of questions like, you know, Sandy Metz type questions, like how long should a method be? And there are questions on that I've been on interviews before as a developer on that team where they ask the same questions to senior developers, but they're kind of looking for different answers out of that. So they're looking for junior level developer answers where they're also curious where if they don't know them. I think a few of the questions they were asking to see if you're going to bluff because you should know the answer to them. So they kind of are asking to see if you're going to admit, I don't know that yet. So there were a few of those too. I didn't have any coding tests, but there were technical questions on there to prove that you know what you're doing and explaining how to solve a problem. One of the better examples of that would be, you know, you're looking at an old controller with no tests and you need to refactor it. What would you do to do it? And then they're looking to see if you can say, well, first I would write tests for it and then I would refactor it, because that way it's two birds with one stone. You're refactoring the old controller to make it better and you're also writing tests for it, so now it has test coverage. So that's the kind of thing that they would be looking for with that, which you could definitely screw up that answer or just say, well, it doesn't have tests. You just try to, you know, fix it, maybe leave it alone, whatever you want to do. I had to go into the office after that. I braved the storm and I was thinking, okay, well, here comes the whiteboarding. Here comes the technical interview that I've been terrified of the whole time. And I came in and I just met with the director of software engineering, and he had a job offer for me. So everything went really great. And I think that, like I was saying before, how I chose this place partially based on the discussion I had with other developers that were there that I found through networking. And I think some of them actually put a good word in for me, because most junior developers aren't talking to developers at the places where they're looking to interview. He said, I put in a really good word for you because you did your research, you worked hard, you brought up TDD before anyone even asked you about it, that kind of thing. So being proactive, talking to developers, making sure that they're happy there, showing an interest in where you're going to work instead of just trying to get your foot in any door that you can is big. You realize more than you know as an entry-level developer when you're in a full program like this, because I nailed questions that a lot of people with 3 years experience didn't know how to answer. You should be confident about how much you know as a junior level developer. You're very well-rounded because you haven't figured out what specialty you want to take on yet. I knew more than I thought I would. I think a lot of junior level developers that I've interviewed since then have a lot of really good answers.
So for me, you know, it almost always started with a phone. Actually, I think every interview or connection started with a phone interview, sometimes with a recruiter, every once in a while with an HR person, but those are usually pretty quick. And then I think every interview I had started with some sort of a tech phone screen. It really ran the gamut. I had interviews sort of all over the place, but the tech phone screens were usually pretty consistent, maybe talking a little bit, like Ben mentioned, about just sort of philosophy of programming, Rails, maybe TDD, what is an object, stuff like that. A lot of times it was more, tell me about your projects, tell me what you've worked on. Have you worked on a team? Have you collaborated? Kind of the same stuff that you'll get in an interview, on an in-person interview, which is sort of on a lighter scale. They just want to see if you can have some sort of a semi-sensible conversation about code. If you can't, then there's no sense pulling you in for an interview. One of the big things to remember for interviewing, and this is true in any field, but I think especially here, they're just as nervous as you are. It's hard to find a good developer. It's expensive to bring somebody in. It's even harder to let somebody who's not very good go. So they're really just trying to find somebody who's going to be a good fit. It's like dating. You're just trying to see if you both think that the other is a good match. And if it's not a good match, go look for another job anyway. If it's not a good match, then you shouldn't be there. So I tried to stay really just sort of calm and treated each interview as, let me go talk to these people, see what happens. After the phone interview, almost every single time, like within 10 minutes, sometimes they let me know, sometimes it just sort of showed up, but I'd get some sort of a coding challenge in my mailbox. And there were two different kinds of coding challenges that I tended to get. One was there's an online web app that you can use, and I forget what it is. I used it like 3 or 4 different times, that basically is timed. Once you log in and start the test, I had a couple of them that were 1 hour. I think one of them was 3 hours that you have to complete all the coding challenges. Before you do it, there's a chance to do a practice test, and I would definitely recommend doing the practice test, because one of the big things is just figuring out, okay, how do I set up to read their data? Because you're going to read tests from their app and write back out to their app. There's usually at least one easy question. I got the FizzBuzz question a bunch of times. So there's usually something that was fairly straightforward. They would always have, a bunch of test suites that ran. Usually the first test suite was pretty easy to pass, but the other ones, there was a time limit. So you could build sort of a naive solution and solve some of the more complex problems and get that test to pass. Go through and try to get some basic answer, get a test or two to pass for each question. And then you can always go back and start refining them. They put some tests in there that are pretty tough sometimes. They're just looking to see how you problem solve, how you work under a little bit of pressure and code. The interview itself, again, I think it's a matter of trying to stay as calm as you can. I found almost all of my interviews were much more about culture fit than anything else. In fact, I had 1 or 2 interviews that I went in that we never talked tech at all. It was really much just like shooting the breeze with somebody. They really want to know, like, who are you? It's part of that story. As Angel said, getting to know somebody and having their story, they're more likely to give you the job. About 50% of the interviews had some sort of whiteboarding. Again, I had to do the FizzBuzz question once. There was one I had to, they said, okay, there's a parking lot and you need to create a database layout for this parking lot that accepts, money for transactions and stuff. I'd ask a few questions. They're like, I don't know, whatever. They want to see how you're going to tackle a problem. With anything like that, I say the most important thing is to think out loud, because really what they want to know is how are you thinking about it? Break the problem down into some small pieces. Even if you don't know how to solve it, break it down into some small pieces, start to diagram it, start to identify what you do and don't know. I had a question about an active record query that I didn't know how to do. And I started to write this query and I realized I didn't have enough information to do it, but I stopped and said, oh, I don't think I can do that. And I started to find this really inelegant solution to it. And they said, oh, well, you could use the joins in there. Oh, okay. How do you do that? And I asked them. But I think they want to know that, I think as Ben said, you're not just going to BS your way through. They want to know that if you're on the job, you know what you don't know, and if you don't know, you'll ask questions and keep sort of a level head. The other piece, I think, for interviewing for me was that I asked probably as many questions as they did in a lot of cases. And I think in many cases, I think they stopped asking me questions because I was asking them so many questions, and I think it gave them a good sense of what I would be like as a developer, asking them about their stack, asking them about TDD, asking about the size of their code, asking them, what do you like about your code? What do you not like about your code? What would you change if you could? Just start down some of those paths, asking questions, and you can really learn a lot about the company, and you can show a lot about what you know and what you'll be like as a developer.
There is not a whole lot worse you can do than they ask you 50 questions and then they get to you say, do you have any questions for us? Nope, that's it. We've had really, really, really bad feedback on people who had a great interview and then just said, nope, no questions for you. I know everything about your company and I know exactly everything you guys are doing. So no. So that's super bad to not do any research, not have any questions for somewhere. It just shows that you don't really know what you're doing kind of, or you don't care. So it's tough to come back from that.
Similar experiences to what kind of Ben and Aaron had as far as the interview goes. Nothing too like tech intense where now I'm solving the algorithms on a whiteboard and I've got like a timer or something on it. Nothing like that. A lot of my coding questions came before the interview. In an email, hey, these are a couple questions just to kind of see if you at least know how to think through code. I think I had FizzBuzz. I had some pseudocode type questions. I had how to write a chess app, which is pretty sweet, coming from Firehose, right? So, things like that. Once we were on an interview, yeah, a lot of questions just on basics. Since you present yourself as newer, then they know what to expect. I mean, if someone's senior enough and they've been around, they kind of know what it's like to be someone new. So they're not going to throw you, if they throw you any like harder questions, that really is to see, to gauge if you're willing to say, hey, I don't know that, or hey, tell me more about that process, kind of like what Aaron ran into, that active record query. I think that was perfect. Hey, I don't know, why would I do that, or how would I do that? That just kind of shows people that you're willing to learn. It was really on very basic things as far as just how the web works in general. They wanted to see if I could understand what was happening at each step of the process, because that would help in debugging if something happened, not just in your code, but outside of it. Things could go wrong outside of your code as well. And if you're at least familiar with what's happening, then you kind of have an idea of what point. I think they're not measuring how much code you can write. They're measuring if you can think through problems. And that's really what they're coming down to, because I think if they find the right candidate, they can probably teach you a language, just like, we were able to learn Ruby right here in Firehose. You could probably pick up another language as well. They're really looking at how you can think through a problem. That's what so valuable about what Aaron said, right? Take the big problem and start talking through your process instead of just kind of staying quiet. Well, that's the big problem. I probably, break it down into these two problems. Once I have that, then I try to figure this part out and kind of just break it down and talk them through your thinking process. I had an interview for a Python shop. I took a brief look at Python ahead of time. But I mean, brief like 30 minutes, not brief like 5 days on it or something. So just enough to see where, hey, you know what, I can read the code. I kind of have the general idea of what it's doing. So it's not like I'd be completely lost if they tell me, hey, what's happening here? They knew when they offered me the interview that I was not a Python developer. So it's not like it was a secret to them. It's not like if they start asking me some, Python heavy syntax, I was going to be able to make it up, because they knew ahead of time, I'm not a Python dev. Being upfront of where you're at. You don't want to downsell yourself, but you also don't want to lie about what you're capable of, not capable of doing. That kind of just comes across, I don't know, nasty if you do that. And then the other shop was a DevOps position. That was interesting because that was actually like an interview with a remote person. So I went into an office, but they had one person there and one person on the screen that was in Canada. And that was actually a bit of a drier type of interview, not too much back and forth. But it was still, the questions that they threw at me were more Ruby questions. And it was more kind of like scripting, like how would you pull this info, how would you pull that? Nothing too complicated. And again, the things that I didn't know how to do, I just tell them, hey, you know what? I wouldn't know how to do that. I think maybe we can go down this route. I'd still give them options. I try never to just say, I don't know. If I had to say, I don't know, I'd throw something like, I don't know. I'm thinking it would be something like that. I could be wrong, but if I had no other way, this is probably how I try to solve it. At least come across as someone who's willing to learn and willing to try.
I found there was definitely a range. Like I said, I had FizzBuzz from a bunch of different places. I had algorithms that, weren't too bad. I had, a whole app that I was supposed to build. So, I mean, it really ran the gamut. Do the best you can on any of them. If they're looking to see how you problem solve. But anytime you get one, I had some fairly complex algorithms on a coding challenge, learned how to do it afterward. I went out to the web and was like, okay, if you need to find I forget what it was, but the largest sum in the substring, whatever it was, let me go figure out how to do it so that if I get this again, I know how to do it. Staying up on your algorithm chops, I think, is certainly a good thing. Another thing, just to add on the interviews, I definitely got the sense that most of the interviews I went on, they already knew how talented I was at coding based on my coding samples. It didn't feel like they were testing my coding skills when I was in the interview. The whiteboarding and all of that was much more about problem solving on the fly and just making sure that, let's see if this guy really wrote his own code or did he take this from somebody else. So most of it, I think, came from the coding that you present to them on Gist and GitHub and in your apps.
The ones that I experienced were also pretty comparable to the Firehose ones in difficulty. I think if you can solve those, then you're in pretty good shape to solve most of the, especially entry-level challenges that you come in with. I don't think I've ever seen a coding challenge at a job where I didn't leave feeling like I did a pretty good job with it. Even if I didn't 100% complete it and I had to pair with somebody there to finish it or just leave it as is, I've always been kind of happy with how I left it. So
Just to sort of give some background for everybody, the coding challenges on the platform are ones that I just ripped off because I used to interview people, and we would just, all of the coding challenges were just, those are the questions we would always ask people. They're also pretty difficult. Like, we'd ask it to junior and senior people. We don't expect the junior people to get it as good as the senior people, but we're asking the same questions just to watch how they walk through. So that's just some background on sort of my experience conducting the interviews on the other side.